I'm joined now by the chair of the DNC, Ken Martin. Thanks so much for joining me.
Hey, thanks, Brian. Really appreciate it.
So we have about a week to go here where the Republicans are trying to ram through their budget bill. This is a bill that we've spoken about for what feels like months now, where they're trying to strip healthcare away, Medicaid away from 14 million Americans, strip food assistance away to the tune of $300 billion, explode the deficit at the same time. What is the timeline right now as you're looking at it, and how is that impacting what your message is to folks around the country?
Well, I mean, look, it's urgent right now that everyone who cares about people having health care in this country, people having nutrition programs and food benefits, that we're standing up and fighting back right now. I mean, this bill would be devastating. As you mentioned, 14 million Americans that would be kicked off of health insurance. Of course, many families that rely on food benefits, nutrition benefits, who would have to find their, food elsewhere. The impacts are quite significant. Rural hospitals and clinics that would close throughout this country, depriving people, not just folks on Medicaid, but depriving people in rural communities of healthcare access. I mean, this is a significant bill. And for what, by the way, Brian? All to give tax breaks to the wealthiest people in our communities, those who already have so much. And I want to share my personal story with you real quick, Brian, because you know what? My mom was 15 years old when she had me. She was a single mom who raised 4 kids by herself by the time she was 20 years old. We were in and out of shelters. We struggled mightily with poverty when I was a child. If it wasn't for Medicaid, I wouldn't have had health care. And if it wasn't for WIC and SNAP benefits, I wouldn't have had food. I'm just one of millions of people, frankly, who were able to make it, to actually make something of myself because there was a safety net that made sure that I didn't fall through the cracks and that this struggling young mother was able to actually provide for her family. And, I don't share that story for pity. I share that story to just reflect on what this is going to mean for families throughout this country right now. It's going to devastate their lives, and it's certainly going to have a devastating impact on communities throughout the nation. Now, right now, we fully expect every Republican, there's a lot of theatrics going on right now in Washington, of course, with Republicans saying they're going to vote against it. I expect that they will, much like they have in the past, fall in line with Donald Trump, and they will pass this bill. And we still have time to put pressure on them and hope that they'll do the right thing, that they'll grow a spine and actually do the right thing for their constituents. But I have no faith, given what we've already seen in these short 5 months of this administration, that Republicans will fall in line and that this bill will pass over the next week.
Well, look, Republicans obviously know how aggressively unpopular this bill is. Polling shows that it's between net negative 20 points and net negative 29 points. So probably the most unpopular piece of legislation that I could remember in modern politics. And yet they're trying to, they need some way to justify this. And so they're claiming, of course, like they have, that this is going to root out waste, fraud, and abuse, that nobody who's a legitimate recipient is going to have their coverage impacted. There's no way that could be true. The math just doesn't math there. There's no way that you can cut 14 million Americans off of Medicaid and expect anybody to believe that all those people were getting it as the result of like fraud. And so as they're perpetuating this disinformation campaign where they're trying to explain to them, I think they put a commercial out yesterday or something explaining how this is going to strengthen earn benefits and entitlement programs, and nobody who deserves them are going to be impacted. So as they're perpetuating this disinformation campaign, what's your message to Americans who are going to be confused because they hear Republicans claiming that they're not going after any of the people who clearly at the end of the day are going to be impacted?
Yeah, look, I mean, we just have to get the facts out there. And, as you mentioned, 14 million Americans are going to be booted off of health insurance. It's going to have a significant cost to states and local governments. I mean, I'm here in North Carolina today. The cost in terms of federal Medicaid to this state is going to be somewhere in the range of $39 billion. It's going to cost North Carolinians, and it's going to close 5 rural hospitals just in this state alone and kick off 600,000 North Carolinians from their health insurance. We need to localize this in very clear ways. We need to localize it not just on a state level, but on a community level, and give the people a sense of how many people it's going to impact. And frankly, it's going to impact more than people that are just on Medicaid right now or just receive SNAP benefits. It's going to impact communities wide and far. As I mentioned, if you close a rural hospital because they don't have the funds, that means anyone that needs healthcare access who lives in a rural community is going to be denied the ability to receive healthcare access close to their home. I use my father-in-law as an example, right? He lives in southern Minnesota. He's a beef cattle farmer, and his hospital closed a few years ago for different reasons, but it closed, and as a result, he has to drive 75 miles just to get healthcare access. He's 85 years old, right? He shouldn't have to do that. This is what the impact of this bill is going to be, and we have to do everything we can to combat the misinformation and the lies that the Republicans are putting out there, because the honest truth of this is that it's going to impact all Americans, regardless of whether or not they're on Medicaid, based on these closures and based on these cuts to nutrition programs. So it also will have a huge impact on rural economies. As we know, if you cut SNAP benefits as they're planning on doing, it's going to hurt farmers. One of the biggest markets for farmers, of course, is through the SNAP program, through the USDA, and there's no doubt that that's going to hurt rural economies throughout this nation. So I say all of this because we just have to do everything we can to tell the real stories of people who are going to be impacted, make sure that those are amplified, and do everything we can to put pressure on Republican senators and Republican members of Congress to actually grow a damn spine and put their constituents above party at this point.
Why do you think that part isn't breaking through? The fact that the people who are going to be most impacted by this, or the most severely impacted, are those folks in rural communities. Rural communities obviously vote overwhelmingly red. And so where do you think that disconnect comes from, where you have folks who, might rely on one hospital, and when that closes down as the direct result of this bill, these people are in communities, they're not going to have any access to healthcare, or they're not within, maybe 100 miles to a hospital, but those are the folks who really bolster the very party that's looking to take those things away. Why do you think that disconnect exists or continues to exist?
Well, there's a whole host of reasons. We've talked about them before, right? One of those is we're not organizing in those communities anymore. As a result, we don't have relationships built around trust. So we're not seen as trusted messengers. When we come around and start talking about these issues, we don't have relationships built with the voters. And so part of it is finding credible messengers who can actually connect with them. Local messengers who they know is really important. We've talked about micro-influencers, nano-influencers. Some of this is tactical.
To that point then, what is the DNC doing in terms of investing in those communities that so often get overlooked, so that we can have a presence there and not just let the Republican narrative take hold, even when their own policies are hurting their own constituents?
Yeah, and I'm glad you raised that. And, look, that's why I'm on this tour right now. I'm in North Carolina on our Organize Everywhere, Win Anywhere tour. The idea that, there's no such thing as a perpetual red state or a perpetual blue state or a perpetual red community or a perpetual blue community. We actually have to organize everywhere. And part of that is organizing in person, on the ground, year-round, making sure we're developing trust with voters built around shared values. And this is the perfect opportunity, because guess what? As you mentioned earlier, there is widespread disapproval with this bill. There is, and it cuts across ideological lines, whether it's conservative Republicans to very far progressive Democrats. At the end of the day, this is one thing that unites Americans right now, is they do not want to see this bill pass. That provides an opportunity for us, if we're willing to take advantage of that opportunity, to actually expand our coalition, to get back to building trust with those voters. So one of the things we've already launched is our Organize Everywhere tour, where we're not only doing this tour, but we're making deep investments, deepest investments we ever have in that type of organizing through our state parties. We've also stood up our permanent communications infrastructure, making sure we're doing exactly what you do, right? Which is using micro-influencers, nano-influencers, and others who are trusted in their communities to actually help us get this message out, to make sure that people know exactly what this bill is going to do to their community on a very local level. Sometimes when we talk about these proposals, through the lens of 14 million people being kicked off of health insurance, it seems so impersonal, right? But when you start to localize it and you tell someone in a rural community that what this means is that your clinic that's down the street from you is going to close and you're going to have to drive 100 miles for health insurance, that's the type of stuff. We need to localize it with local messengers and trusted validators to actually break through all of this noise right now.
I want to switch gears a little bit here to New York. Obviously, the mayoral Democratic primary just took place with somebody like Mamdani, who is certainly not an establishment figure. How does his surprise victory, his upset victory, how does that inform how you think about the candidates that are being put forward in the Democratic Party moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, first off, let me say that, my job, as I've always said, is to make sure that we support our Democratic nominees, whether they come from, they're conservative Democrats, centrist Democrats, progressives, or leftists. At the end of the day, I believe that we are a big tent party, and we win through addition, not through subtraction. And yes, while that makes for some messy debates at times within our party, that's exactly what differentiates us from the Republicans. We welcome dissent and debate. We welcome new ideas. We welcome new people and new voices, because that's what helps our party evolve on all of these critical issues. And I would say, specific to this race, though, I think one of the things that huge takeaways for me is that what I said when I ran for DNC chair, and I'm pretty consistent on, is that our party has to focus on an economic agenda and focus on actually making it more affordable for people to live their lives and to actually get ahead. If you really, take everything down and boil down what happened in this race, Mamdani was focused almost exclusively on affordability, right? But what he did at the beginning of that campaign was nothing short of magnificent. He went out and he listened to voters. The first thing he did is he went out and he talked to people who voted for Trump and said, why did you vote for Trump? He talked to other voters and asked, what do you want to see in New York? And then he built an agenda. He built his message around what he heard from people. Again, he built trust with voters, had a conversation with them, had a dialogue with them, and he did it throughout New York City. He organized everywhere, which is another point I've been saying. And the third thing he did, and this is the piece that I think folks really need to understand, is we need to find messengers who can compete both in those in-person spaces, right, and change hearts and minds through personal conversations at the doors and in person at events, but also can do the same in these new digital spaces, right? Really through a very consistent and disciplined message operation of focusing on the things that people in New York cared about. That's the real takeaway here. And as much as people want to make this about ideology within our party, right? Look, the reality is the big lesson is this is how people should campaign. We need authentic messengers who are bold, who stand up and fight for what they believe in, who are unapologetic about it, and who are focused on the things that people actually care about. If we had candidates like that running throughout the country, we would be successful. And that's the big takeaway for me.
Do you think that 2026 will represent the Democratic Tea Party year?
Well, again, I sort of reject that idea of the Tea Party, because you know what? I've always felt like what we need, there's no one way or a stripe of being a Democrat. And what do I mean by that? I mean, I want you to think about in Minnesota, for example. In Minneapolis, in the 5th District, I have Ilhan Omar, who is a leftist Democrat. Right next to her, right, was Dean Phillips, a centrist Democrat. Their districts are right next to each other. And then right next to Dean for years was a guy named Colin Peterson, a conservative Democrat. And all three couldn't be remarkably different. I could not run Dean Phillips in Ilhan's district and expect to win any more than I could run Ilhan in Dean's district and expect to win. Yet all three of them, great friends of mine, right? All three of them are equally important to me, because what is the role and the goal of the Democratic Party? It's not to find candidates that fit the same exact mold. It's to find candidates who can win in their districts so we can actually win majorities and build power to get anything done for people in Congress or in the legislature or wherever we're trying to elect people. So for me, I've never been prescriptive on this is how you have to be a Democrat. There's many different ways and stripes of being a Democrat, and we have to be cognizant of that. You know, we probably couldn't run an Ilhan Omar in northern Minnesota any more than we could run someone from northern Minnesota in Minneapolis. Right. And I think that's I don't want people to feel like there's only one way of being a Democrat. So this idea that there's a Tea Party movement, what I want candidates to come forward who are going to take that same energy and approach to campaigning. That's what we need. And, wherever you fit on the ideological spectrum is irrelevant to me as long as it fits the district and you can win.
Right. Perfectly put. We'll leave it there. Ken Martin, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Brian.